As we journey with Mary, we pick up this second Sunday of Advent after Mary had been dropped a bomb by the angel Gabriel. Not only is this very young woman from the peasant class of Nazareth loved by God, but Gabriel tells her that she has found favor with God. And in this favor, this young girl has been chosen by God to divinely conceive a child. Not just conceive a child, but conceive a son who will be called Son of the Most High and will take over the throne of David. Gabriel tells Mary that her son's kingdom will never end. This was Mary from the peasant class hearing all of this. And we heard about Mary being a bit confused, but finally giving God her yes. You can imagine the whirlwind that Mary was feeling. All she was doing was going around and doing her daily chores when all of a sudden she's divinely visited with a world-changing message that put her in a lot of danger. If this is true, this isn't just a nice story of a young girl having an important baby. This is the story of a young girl having a baby that will turn the world upside down. And Gabriel is there, all of a sudden sharing all of this with Mary, and then just as suddenly as he arrived, Gabriel is gone. Mary is there alone. I'm sure her head was buzzing, trying to make sense of everything that she's just been told. And if you're like me, sometimes we need space to figure things out. Sometimes we might even agree to something in the moment, but are completely unsure of how it's going to work out. I'll never forget, in September of 2014, we had just returned from Puerto Rico, and Bianca found out that she was pregnant with Caden. We were both excited and nervous and dreaming about who this child would be. We were dreaming about what this child would look like, but also what we needed to do to prepare for the birth of this first child. Now, I don't remember how long in the pregnancy it was, but I remember one morning as we were getting ready for the day, looking at her through the bathroom mirror and asking her a thoughtful question. What if this baby comes out and I don't feel anything? Everybody talks about this unconditional love that is born with your child, but what if I don't feel that? I was nervous, I was curious, and I was unsure of myself. But in God's wisdom, God created the 9-month pregnancy for humans. It's not just a proper gestation period for the child, but also a window of preparation for us, parents. 9 months to get ourselves together, not just materially, but emotionally and spiritually as well. It's like an onboarding to parenthood. I think in different ways and methods, God provides these processing windows anytime we give God our yes. For Mary, it was the journey to her cousin Elizabeth's house. After she gave her yes, she remembered the end of Gabriel's message that said that Elizabeth, her cousin, whose husband was a priest and who hadn't been able to have any children up to that point, was also pregnant and was in her 6th month of pregnancy. Mary was very alone in her pregnancy. She couldn't tell anyone. She couldn't rely on the elder women's wisdom about being pregnant, because if it was found out that she was pregnant, she could be stoned to death. So she immediately began a journey to Elizabeth's house in the hill country of Judea. This journey wasn't an easy one. Depending on where Elizabeth actually lived, it was an 80 to 100-mile journey that would take around 6 days for Mary to make. And it was dangerous. Thieves were known to rob people on these roads. And for a woman to be traveling alone, it's very dangerous. But Mary felt like she needed to be there, and so she headed out. I imagine she didn't tell anyone she was going. She just remembered the message of Gabriel and went directly towards Elizabeth. Now I imagine the walking of the journey did her good. Being by herself, she didn't have to talk to anyone. She could think, she could pray all that she wanted. And I bet there was a mixture of joy, a mixture of fear and tears and deliberation on her journey. There's something about the repetition of walking that really allows our spirits to make sense of things. And this journey allowed her to process the message that Gabriel had sent to her and the role that she was going to play in this process. But it's also interesting to me that she makes this journey, because remembering at how old she was, remember in the first century Palestine, it was tradition for 13-year-olds to be married, to maximize the childbearing age. And so what happens to Jewish girls when they're 13? They undergo their bat mitzvah. It's a rite of passage from childhood into adulthood. I can't help but thinking that maybe God sent Mary on this journey as a rite of passage. As she's going from her childhood into her womanhood. And it was a dangerous journey. And lots of rites of passages, as we study throughout history, are dangerous. Because it can't just be something simple to do. It has to be something difficult. It's almost like you're experiencing the death of your younger self, and you're being reborn into your adult self. And so many traditional rites of passages are dangerous for this very reason. So it's almost like Mary was being brought into adulthood really quickly in this long journey to Elizabeth's house. I wonder if that was one of the reasons. But God seems to give us these windows of preparation when we give our yes. And I like to think that that's what happened here with Mary. And when she got to Elizabeth's house, everything that Mary was thinking was affirmed. Everything about Mary was affirmed. Luke says that Elizabeth is overjoyed to see her. She shouts for all the world to hear, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear." The Greek that's used here when it says that Mary shouts or proclaims the saying is not just that she's talking loud. It's like she's using a megaphone to tell all the world that Mary is here. Blessed are you among women. She's talking to Mary. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is your child. Luke tells us that Elizabeth is filled with the Spirit. But for Mary, I wonder if Elizabeth's boldness was comforting. You know how sometimes we need the boldness of others to create our own? How sometimes the confidence of someone else who has that confidence in us, in turn, gives us the confidence that we need? I bet that was Elizabeth to Mary. And I think that is another lesson in this part of Mary's story. I'm a firm believer that God never asks us to walk alone. I think the lonely soldier is a myth that God doesn't prescribe to. I believe that when God acts in the world, God's actions appear in multiple places. As an example, I believe that the civil rights movement was an act of God. I believe that Dr. King was called by God to lead this movement. But it wasn't just Dr. King. He had a number of other people that were called by God to lead as well. Bayard Rustin, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer. They were called by God too. King didn't have to do it by himself. God was working in multiple places, and not just in the United States. This goes well beyond the United States. As we here in the U.S. were engaged for civil rights, Africa and Asia were engaged in decolonization movements at the exact same time. Ghana gained its independence from Britain in 1957. Nigeria from Britain in 1960. Tanzania in 1961. These are a few examples of the worldwide movements for freedom, because God doesn't I believe that God doesn't act singularly, but when we see moves of God, we see it in multiple places. God doesn't ask us to walk alone. God's movement can be seen in more places than in just one. And God was acting through Elizabeth like God was acting through Mary. Through Elizabeth, John the Baptist is born, the one who prepares the way for Jesus. Even in the womb, Luke says that John is leaping when Jesus is near. But for Mary, Elizabeth is an important figure in multiple ways. First, as I just mentioned, I believe that Elizabeth was affirming for Mary, even celebrated. Once Mary shows up, Elizabeth immediately greets her with a warm welcome and a loud welcome, saying, "You are here. You are blessed." Because remember, Mary has to be feeling a lot of fear. She's just been visited by Gabriel. She's just gone on this treacherous journey to the hill country of Judea. And she shows up to this priest's house as a pregnant, unwed woman. She's got to be filled with fear. And Elizabeth's actions toward her have to be affirming. That Elizabeth welcomes her with arms wide open, takes her into her house. And not only is she welcoming her, but her baby, the John that's in the womb in her 6th month, is leaping for joy. That has to be affirming for Mary. And second, Elizabeth serves as a teacher for Mary, I believe. Mary stays with her for 3 months. And even though she's never had a child, Elizabeth has likely known many women who do have had children. And also in her 6th month, she can pass down the wisdom that she herself has learned. And she can teach this to Mary. And Mary can watch Elizabeth and learn from the experience that as she's watching Elizabeth. Because remember, Mary can't talk to anyone. She can't share what she's experiencing. She has to keep it to herself. So she can't go to the older women in the village and ask for what she should do, or how to best care for the child in her womb. And so Elizabeth is serving as her teacher. But also, it's not just the wisdom of pregnancy that she's learning. She's also finding Elizabeth's faith and her strength. And I believe that that's rubbing off on her. That it's pouring into Mary, maybe not intentionally, but subconsciously. The way that Elizabeth is sinking into Mary. I think it gave Mary the courage that she needed to move in the world, to move in the years to come. But also, immediately after this initial greeting, what happens? Mary goes off on her own and sings one of the most dangerous songs, one of the most prophetically beautiful songs that we call the Magnificat. That doesn't come from someone who hasn't been affirmed in her role and feels like that she does have something to say and something to do. It doesn't come off by someone who's full of fear. It's a bold statement. So she had to find that boldness from somewhere, and I believe it comes from this meeting with Elizabeth. God is not going to leave us alone. When we give God our yes, we might need to take a journey to really fully understand what God is asking of us. But we also have to know that we don't have to do it by ourselves. There is someone else in this world that can be our teacher, that can serve as our affirmer. And that God will usually present that person to us. I don't know about you, but have you ever had someone in your life do that for you? I fought being a pastor my whole entire life. My dad was a pastor. I did not want to be a pastor. I saw what pastors' lives were like. I saw the presumptions that people had on who pastors are supposed to be. And I didn't want to deal with any of that. And I fought against that my whole life. When I went to college, I took a religion class. And my professor, who was a Princeton graduate, told me that, "Oh, you should go to seminary. You're really interested in this. This would be great for you." I said, No. I play football. I don't want to do that. And then I got into theater. And I started finding joy in doing theater. And eventually those roads closed for me. And then I got into various things, which led me into seminary. Some of you know the story. I got into seminary, and I still didn't want to be a pastor. I wanted to be a nonprofit organizer. But there was one person that almost served as Elizabeth for me. He was the bishop in the AME Zion Church, and he was our preaching pastor. And he pointed at me, and he told me, "You have the gifts to be a preacher. You are called to be a preacher. You need to be a preacher." And I just dismissed him. I said, and I left. But that boldness that he had in me, that faith that he had in me planted a seed. And it sat there, and it was planted within me, and it blossomed, and allowed me to go on a journey that I've had a love-hate relationship with my entire life. But eventually, I realized that that was what God was calling me to be. That was the role God had for me in this life. And that was where God was directing me towards. And all these little pathways of different things that I went down, whether it was sports, whether it was theater, whether it was politics, what it was all bringing me back into the church, giving me different skills, giving me different bases of knowledge, giving me all these different gifts that serve me in important ways now that I've accepted my call as a pastor. But if it wasn't for Bishop Johnson, and it wasn't for him pointing his finger at me and having the faith and the courage and the affirmation, I wouldn't have had the confidence to say yes to the call that God has for me. Sometimes we need an Elizabeth to affirm us and to be our teacher. And so I invite you to think about the call that God has on your life. Who is your teacher? Who is your affirmer? Who is your Elizabeth? There's someone there that God has placed. And I invite you to reflect on that. Maybe you haven't experienced it yet. Maybe look for that. But I promise you it's there, because God never lets us walk alone. Amen.